today. Right now, my committee here is going to be the true audience. So they will be the ones who ask questions throughout the process and so forth. But this is sort of, just think of this as live theater and you're just the audience and then these are the rest of the cast members. So, and I have a microphone. We will. Oh, yeah, that would be fun. Yeah, before the official. All right. Hello. Okay. Yes, it's on. Okay, so I have the microphone, mostly because I have my parents coming in via technology there. So, so they wanted to see this. So I will go ahead and get started whenever. All right, so they will allow you to ask questions before the official question. So yours won't actually be official questions, but you can ask questions. All right, well, thank you for joining me today. My study that I spent the last good chunk of a year working on is sense of belonging and the lived experiences of students of color in a racially diverse honors program. And I did this in partial fulfillment for my PhD from the Department of Educational Leadership and Policy Studies in the College of Education at the University of Texas at Arlington. So I won't go through everything on my agenda right this second. It's fairly long, but we're going to go through a number of things today, starting with a little preliminary background, which is more of a reminder for my committee, as I had chapters 1 through 3 approved in my proposal defense, and then we'll go on through new information that was in chapters 4 and 5, my recommendations, and then questions. So, background, going back to my proposal, honors programs at universities give high-achieving undergrad students a more in-depth experience with their undergrad education. This involves meeting additional expectations, such as doing undergraduate research, as well as completing a capstone requirement. Students who are in honors programs must have honors credit. There's 3 main ways that students can do this, either being in an honors-only class section, where it's small class with only honors students, being in a hybrid class section where honors students have slightly different requirements, and then contracts where they're in a regular class and they do an extra project with a professor one-on-one. Being involved in an honors program has been shown to be positively correlated with collegiate engagement. This is important because honors programs promote a strong sense of belonging for these students. Why do we care about sense of belonging? Well, a sense of belonging helps build that connectedness to a group. It gives you support at that academic institution where you're at. Persons who have that connection and a sense of belonging are then more likely to persist and be retained at their institution, helping with graduation rates, which is a big deal for universities. However, for students of color, these students are less likely to be identified for gifted and talented programs starting as very young children, even at the preschool ages. This moves on as an issue starting from preschool up through high school. Even for students who are academically eligible and ready, it's been shown that high schools that have high percentages of students of color are less likely to offer advanced college prep classes. So the higher the percentage of students of color in a high school, the less likely it is that that high school has college prep classes. So this is then a disadvantage for the students moving up into what I'm studying at universities. So the students of color then are already at a disadvantage once they get to a university. Students of color in honors programs then may have a more difficult time building a sense of belonging, as honors programs tend to have disproportionately white populations. Even as universities in the United States have become more racially diverse, honors programs tend to lag behind and tend to still be more white than the overall university population. Most research then on honors students is by default based on white students. However, there are a few honors programs in the United States with sizable populations of students of color, and that's starting to slowly change. Therefore, the purpose of this study was to explore the lived experiences and perceptions of sense of belonging of honors students of color in a racially diverse honors program at a large urban research university. To find out more about this, I had 3 research questions that I worked out with my committee. The first one was, how do students of color enrolled in honors programs describe their experiences? The second was, what helps foster a sense of belonging among students of color enrolled in honors programs? And the third, what hinders a sense of belonging among students of color enrolled in honors programs? So, why do we care about this? The significance of this study comes from a few different things. Students of color are increasingly enrolling at colleges, but still disproportionately underrepresented in higher education. Again, in honors programs, that underrepresentation is an even greater issue beyond overall enrollment. So this study can help to provide knowledge to help honors program administrators increase diversity. It can help provide a new perspective on this topic where we have some quantitative data, but there's a real lack of qualitative data. The undergirding theory that I used for this was the sense of belonging for college students theoretical model by Terrell Strayhorn. He's done a lot of research on sense of belonging for college students. His theory has 7 main components. So the first one is that to have a sense of belonging, a college student, it's a universal basic human need. So college students are humans, they need to belong. They also then, it's a fundamental motive sufficient to drive behavior. So this is a reason why somebody might join an honors program or a sorority or a club. Everybody wants to belong somewhere. It's dependent upon the context, time, and factors determining importance. So maybe if, say, you're farther away from home, you might feel a greater need to connect with others than maybe if you're still living at home and community. It's related to mattering. So everybody wants to matter, everyone wants to belong. It's influenced by your identities. So everybody has multiple identities. And so depending upon that, if you're in a marginalized group in several different areas, it may become even more important to retain you. A sense of belonging can lead to positive outcome and success. So if you feel like you belong, you're more likely to stay and graduate. And it must be satisfied as conditions change. So basically, a freshman might have different needs than a senior or even a graduate student. And in chapters 4 and 5, I went into how it related. We won't go into that today, but it's in chapters 4 and 5. So my methodology. Again, it was a qualitative study. So the difference, again, between a qualitative study and a quantitative study, the quantitative study would have been more just, what are the numbers? What are we missing? We know a little bit about that. So what we don't know is, what are their stories? What do participants who lived this experience say? A subset of qualitative research is hermeneutic phenomenology. So hermeneutics has to do with the interpretation and meaning of events. It comes from ancient Greece and some ancient philosophy. And so it goes with interpretation. Phenomenology looks at a phenomenon, how do people who are all in this shared experience describe it. So hermeneutic phenomenology looks at how do people who have a shared experience interpret the meaning. So this is my attempt at giving you the interpretation of the participants. So this is not my story. This is my best attempt to give you their story. So to do this, I did several semi-structured interviews. I had 12 final participants, and I also did analytic memo writing throughout the process. So my site selection, it was at a large urban research university in the southwestern United States, hereafter known as SWU. SWU is one of the most racially diverse public universities in the United States. And most importantly for my study, SWU also has a racially diverse honors program. So how did I go through my analysis? I won't go into huge detail here, but essentially I interviewed the participants, I transcribed it, coded it, and then for trustworthiness, though, I do want to point out I had member checking. So I had the participants, I emailed them the final dissertation, they got back to me and I had feedback from several of them. So confirming that I had given good representation of their wording, and also peer debriefing. from members of my cohort, as well as colleagues and a professional editor. So I've had multiple sources there looking and checking over my work. So my participants, I used criterion sampling. That meant essentially they have to meet criteria. So my criteria, they had to be at least 18 years old. That was somewhat for convenience for me because I didn't want to have to deal with IRB approval. We do have some college students in the US who might be, say, 17, like I was as a freshman. So I didn't want to have to deal with parental approval. So 18 and older, keep it simple. They had to have been an honors student at SWU for at least one full semester because I wanted them to have had some experience. Most importantly, they needed to have self-identified as a student of color. So I left this open. I worked with my committee during my proposal defense on getting it set up properly, but I left it open to them. So I gave them several different options, including multiracial, but whatever identity they most identified with, that's what we went with that way to take out any recruiter bias. I recruited several different ways, so all of my interviews took place over Zoom, which I'm using to bring my dad in. Hopefully he's figured out how to log in. But because I was in Washington, D.C. this summer with the Archer Fellowship, that actually worked out better than I anticipated because it allowed participants to have an interview at a setting that they were comfortable. So there wasn't any imbalance of power with the location. It was at a setting comfortable for them. But thanks to technology, I could still see body language and all of that through video chat. So my findings, I had 4 main findings, which are broken sub-themes. So we'll start with the first one. The first big one was academic challenge and prestige. So with the findings that emerged through the interviews with the participants, and essentially what that means is I kept seeing recurring themes. So multiple participants kept saying similar themes. So even if it wasn't the exact same words, it's essentially the same kind of concept. So the first sub-theme under this was rigor, which I defined in my paper as desiring a deeper, more meaningful experience than what other students receive. So this was an internal motivator. So this is something that students have that desire to learn more. So here's one of the participant quotes talking about wanting to go the extra mile. So these are students who they're not just here to check a box, they actually want to learn more and they're doing more, not because they have to, because they want to learn more. The second sub-theme under this was recognition, which I defined as a drive to go above and beyond the typical undergraduate curriculum and to be externally motivated. So with this, these are students who are motivated by things like having more lines on your CV, having more scholarships. Essentially, you're doing some of this because you would like to walk across the stage and have everyone know you did more. So that's an external motivator with this. The next big theme was community and friendship. So the first sub-theme with that was belonging, which was a sense of belonging, connection with others. So this participant here was talking about feeling that community, that people care about them. So they're academically motivated, but they also want to know that people care, that they're there. The second sub-theme under this was friendship. So a sense of camaraderie, of trust. And so these students, they might be honors students, but they're human too. So they talked about liking to have a community of people that understood what it was like, working hard, to be stressed, and having people to motivate them and build them up. The next theme was suggestions for improvement. I had 2 main sub-themes for this. So the first was academic improvements. So this is where the participants talked about improvements that they thought could be made to the honors program at SWU. So they talked about things like having more sections with just honors-only courses, having more faculty and staff so that they could have more one-on-one time with them, as well as this participant talked about just making the policies more clear and making it easier to help recruit new students to the program. The second sub-theme I had with this was social improvements. So I had a big range with this, but this was essentially where the participants talked about where they wanted to have some improvements. They talked about having a bigger honors program building. They wanted to have more amenities like a microwave, more programming and events, and just ways to be more connected, build more of that community. So my next theme, the influence of race and experience. I've broken this one down a bit more because this was where it got the most important with my study. So SWU is racially diverse. Participants like this, and they knew about this. So they talked about that being, for some of them, one of the reasons they picked SWU was because they knew it was a racially diverse environment, and so they appreciated that. They also knew that SWU has a racially diverse honors program, more so than a lot of other honors programs. So I was interested because I didn't prompt them on this, but several of them, without prompting, noted to me that they knew that SWU has a more racially diverse honors program than is typical, and they liked that. This, though, they did have a couple of caveats. So the honors program at SWU is very racially diverse, but not quite as racially diverse as the overall campus, and especially with Latinx and Black enrollment, where there could be a little bit more to be closer to the campus numbers. So even though participants recognized that and thought there could be some improvement there, overall they also appreciated this aspect. So this was the real interesting part of the study for me. So it was a semi-structured interview format. Everybody had the same questions initially. And there was a mixture with some of those responses, as you can see. But with this, there was a clear line between what the male participants said and what the female participants said. And I did have an even 6 male, 6 female. It was even across the board, 12 participants, 4 Asian, 4 Latinx, 4 Black, 2 males, 2 females from each. So it was even across the board. The male participants did not strongly identify extra pressures due to race. So for the male participants, the phenomenon of being a student of color in this racially diverse honors program, none of them really talked about anything substantial in terms of any extra pressures due to their racial background. They talked about pressures involved, of course, with being an honors student, but not anything extra due to their racial identity. So here's a quote from one of them talking about it being a positive thing in his mind, an advantage, just a way to stand out even more, that he's not just a Black male doing well in college, but he's a Black male doing well in an honors program, but not talking about pressure. The female participants, however, had some very different things to say. So female participants had both internal pressures and external pressures they talked about. So some of those internal pressures they talked about had to do with their family and cultural backgrounds, so not wanting to let their family down, as well as external pressures talking about their racial identity and their identity as female students. So this one particularly talked about her parents making all these sacrifices so she could be here at college and not wanting any of those sacrifices to be wasted. So we had male participants from similar backgrounds, nothing like that from them. So let's go into what were some of my thoughts on this and what does all this mean? Well, participants had mostly positive responses concerning their lived experiences in a racially diverse honors programs. They did have some suggestions for academic improvement, as well as social improvement. So they like it, but they want some more stuff. They want their amenities and their courses. Going back, and I talked a lot more in depth in chapters 4 and 5 as far as this goes, it did correlate with the theory in that being a student of color in a racially diverse honors program does help foster that sense of belonging. These students talked about being in that diverse environment and appreciating it, talking about the academic challenge and prestige they got being an honors student, as well as that sense of community and friendship that they had built. There were, however, again, just for the female students, talking about some things that hindered that sense of belonging, and that had to do with the internal and external pressures due to the intersection of their racial and sexual identities. So, why does all this matter? It provided an unusual perspective that was lacking in research literature, and that was one of my hardest parts with going through the program, was really realizing there is this gap here in terms of qualitative study. It helped confirm the theoretical framework of sense of belonging for college students for use in studying the lived experience of students of color, and also showed a clear and distinct difference between the experiences of the male and female students of color. So some of my recommendations going forward, I'd like to do some more research exploring gender differences on the lived experience of students of color in honors programs. Again, that wasn't something I was really anticipating finding. It just emerged organically. So I'd like to study that more in depth. I'd also like to do some more research specifically on female students in honors programs, potentially maybe even doing some comparison with white female students and female students of color. So to find out how much of it was that intersection of the racial identity with being a female and how much of it was female pressure. So is it all cultural pressures in terms of the societal differences? The one female, so I did have, out of it, all the males plus one female talked about no pressure. And the one female who didn't talk about the pressure was an international student, which is why I really want to dig into the cultural difference, because all of the others were American. Some were first generation, some were not, but all the ones who were American talked about the cultural pressures. So I really want to dig into that some more. So in conclusion, there's a gap in the research concerning the lived experiences of students of color in racially diverse honors programs. I hope to turn my dissertation when I'm done into at least a couple different journal articles to help fill that gap. No, we would not like to do that right this second. A greater understanding of lived experiences can help improve with building that sense of belonging for college students, and understanding both what fosters and what hinders a sense of belonging is important. Does anyone have any questions? Okay, yes. So some of them talked about having that. I did not filter that, so that would be something for a future study to do more filtering. So having done this study, there's several things I want to do for repeat studies to do some more filtering now that I've seen the first initial bit. Yes.
One of the questions that I had, with the female students that talk about having pressure, do you know if any of them started their honors program at SWU or anybody transferred from a different program and had experience with that may not have been as?
So none of them were transfer students. I did open it up to all students, but just with the participants, again, I did this over the summer, so that might have also skewed it a little bit, but some of them started as freshmen and some of them started later. So, but yes, that would be good for another future studies to specifically try to work in some transfer students.
Did you experience any microaggression or questioning about your status interviewing these people? Like, why would
No,
you?
but I did go through kind of a thorough explanation with them. They did have to fill out the IRB consent form first, which explained really what this study was doing. So I didn't have any of that. And again, I probably wouldn't have gotten that as a researcher. Yes.
Good question. What did learn results? You go a little bit more second in terms of coding.
So I worked with my editor and I went line by line, identifying different keywords. And so again, some of them didn't use the exact same word, but then looking at the different synonyms. So that was several hours of highlighting the different colors and putting it together. But it was one of the fun things with this study was really realizing with that saturation. And so we call saturation for the students I've got here is when you reach a certain point. So where you're hearing the same thing from multiple participants. And there really was a pretty firm consensus with those themes. So they might have had variations, but there was consensus. But yeah, that was several hours and lots of different colors. Have any other question. So I have been accepted to the Southwestern Educational Research Association conference to present on this in February, and that will be, it's actually going to be hosted in Arlington, Texas this year, which is very exciting, so I don't have to get the travel budget. But that'll be in February. I'll be presenting that here in Arlington, Texas. And so, yes. So, and then my next goal is hopefully the National Collegiate Honors Conference will be in Dallas in 2020 in November. So March 1st is when their proposals are usually due. So I'm also hoping to present at that because that's the biggest honors conference. Yes, I've been accepted to present a research day. So I will present a research day for ELPS this year as well. Yes, that will be the next one. But do we have any more audience questions before the committee starts the real deal with me? Yes.
What would you hypothesize are long-term ramifications for 5-10 years after graduation?
So for the students, I don't know how much of an impact it's going to make on them. Hopefully, it'll at least have given them some insight into how the research works. And then I will be giving them the finalized copy so they saw the draft that I sent to my committee. So I will keep in touch with them, but I do have to keep their identities anonymous. So I don't want to delve too much into how I think it will affect all of them individually. But at least they got to participate in a study, so they've seen how it works. So hopefully it'll maybe inspire them. I don't want to give away any identities. Ready, I guess, for the next round? Okay, so they, I think, would like you all to leave the room. So you're welcome to hang out if you would like to. It's going to be a while, so I'm not quite sure. I will be at Fuzzy's at 7:30 tonight. If anybody wants to show up for that.